Welcome to the Decentralized Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Tanner Lytle, here with your other host,
Wyatt Carson. Hi, Tanner.
Hello. Welcome to number 50.
50. This is our 50th episode. To anyone who's listening, to the people who have subscribed to us on your podcast platform, YouTube, Facebook, whatever it is, LinkedIn, thank you. Thank you. We've gotten some solid traction. We have amazing subscribers, great comments, and 50 episodes in. I feel proud. Congrats, Tanner.
Yeah, it's nice to stick to something and have it actually continue. There's so many times you're like, I want to start something, and you make it, once, twice, just a handful of times. But I feel like we're really starting to hit our stride. And I did make the mistake, though, of going back and listening to our first couple episodes.
Don't do it.
We've improved just a little bit. The ums and you knows and all the random things have improved dramatically.
No kidding. Yeah, we've put a lot of effort into this, and it's showing. And less for the audience and more for us. Is I'm proud of us. I think this has been a really fun adventure, and doesn't really show any signs of slowing down. In fact, it's only going to get better. So
more guests and more interesting topics. And on that subject, so
yes,
I sent you over on Discord just kind of a headline that I thought was really interesting and thought would be a really good topic to go, because I know we're both got some pretty strong opinions on this and relay that into the world. So the quote is from the New York Times, and it says, "The percentage of young adults who said that a college degree is very important has dropped to 41% from 74% over the last 10 years. What do you make of that, Wyatt?
That's such a statistically significant drop that you can't ignore it. And that's, I think, if it went from like 55 to 45, like, okay, I could see it. But to have a 35% drop in our population, that's massive. And it really makes you start thinking about root causes for such a shift like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned it, I can't remember if it was on the podcast or a conversation after, but when we were talking about school and animation and stuff, I brought up that I actually was going to go to school for animation. And I think it was between my sophomore and junior year of high school, I got accepted into a college. They're not around anymore. So it was the Art Institute of Colorado. And it shows you how good they were, that they're not even in existence these days. But I got accepted into college, and so I never really did the SAT, ACT type thing, because I was always like, well, I'm in school. What is this? And as we all know, I'm a big nerd. And so I spent all my time when I was in high school, like learning animation, like 2D animation, 3D animation. I would read all these manuals on how to use these software platforms and build really cool, fun stuff. And had some stuff in my senior year that we submitted off, and nonetheless. But when I got to time to go to college, I went to visit, and I brought my portfolio of stuff I was doing. I got to tour this beautiful tower in downtown Denver and do all this stuff. And I talked to the professor, went over the curriculum of what we'd learn over the course of the 3 years. And I realized that I was doing more advanced work than the seniors that were graduating as a senior in high school. So the seniors in college who were getting their bachelor's degrees weren't doing as advanced stuff as I was doing. And I talked to the professor, and thankfully it was his last year there. He was transferring to another school, so he was very candid and open with me. But I was like, what will I get by going to this school? And he talked about, oh, you'll meet all these people, you'll have a good portfolio. And I'm like, yeah, but is that worth $80,000? And that's how much it was just for tuition for 3 years, not room and board in downtown Denver or any of those things. It was just the tuition. And that part really stuck with me, because he said to me, well, that'll be up to you. And that is one of those things that has just haunted me and stuck with me for so many years, is the value that college has been bringing. And this was in 2003. So it's not like, hey, this is a modern thing. This was 20 years ago that I had that conversation. Is college actually worth what it costs?
I think I think there's two questions in that question, if that makes sense. Or 2 points at the very least. The first one is, I think without a doubt, everyone understands that tuition rates have skyrocketed. I mean, well, our parents could go to college for 4 years, get an undergrad degree for 5. I think I heard one of my wife's relatives went to UNL in the early 90s for about $5,000 or $6,000. Got a degree and everything. Cool. Today, a 4-year college degree is exactly as you said. It's somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000, depending on where you go.
I just Googled it. The average 4-year institution is $104,108.
Oh man!
If it's a nonprofit, it's $223,360.
Yeah. So the first question is obviously financially, you have to make the decision to, well, for most of us, you have to make the decision: do I go in debt immediately before I even have a job or career prospects, know what I'm going to do with my life, go into debt that much, the price of what used to be a house? That's the first point and question you have to ask yourself. And then the other point of what you were saying is it ROI positive, right? To put it in business terms, outside of the debt or the getting your family to help you, whatever the situation is, to actually pay for it, you have to consider the ROI of it. And you yourself were talking, it was like, do you think, and this is pure hypothetical, Tanner, if you had gone to that school, do you think you would be an animator today?
Probably not. No. And that was one of the saving things, like from our conversation in our previous episode. That industry has really changed from when I was first looking into it, with like a studio environment where people stayed there a long time, to more 1099 contract based, live and die by the month.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just starting to come together that way when I was going to school. Because I went through a mentorship program for animation. So I didn't give up on that dream entirely. I've just found another avenue. But by the time I was finishing there, I was seeing like the mentors in those systems who were working in studio environments, their struggles that they were starting, and all the changes and how they were starting to be from, oh, I was working at ILM and then I was working at DreamWorks and now I got this stint over at Disney. And then when you're on the outside, that sounds really cool. But then you're just like, oh, that doesn't sound very stable. So I don't know. To me, it was almost a gift that I didn't get into that, just because, not that the work wouldn't be rewarding, but I think the life that I would have been given from it wouldn't have been nearly as fruitful.
Mm-hmm. And the pain it would have caused you to pay back that $80,000 to $100,000.
It'd be
for
insane.
Something that
probably
what
would be your
even
monthly payment there? Like, it'd be a mortgage, straight up be a mortgage.
Easily. And so the thing is, rising costs and rising costs are rising and ROI is dropping. And I don't mean to just like give it a blanket, this is the reason for that statistic of people valuing college degrees less. But it has to be a significant one, right?
Yeah. Well, and I sent you another article here. This one was from Forbes, and it was just talking about how Walmart plans to remove college degree requirements from hundreds of corporate job descriptions. So I thought this, it would tie in really well, because you're talking about ROI. So the biggest thing getting into that was like, you finish high school, you go to college, you get the job. And for the longest time, a college degree was a really good measurement that you at least had the baseline capacity to fulfill a certain role. But what I believe, and I would argue now, is that there's just such a deficiency in terms of what you actually get in terms of knowledge from an actual college degree anymore. Mm-hmm. And this is at all levels to me. Again, I'm gonna swing for the fences a little bit here. I think even community colleges, all the way up to like higher end universities and stuff, just really aren't teaching the essentials needed to be successful out of the gate in a modern work environment. Because not only are things changing so rapidly, but it's just, I don't feel like they actually teach to truly learn. I think it's just gotten to the point where they just teach to get people through.
Mm-hmm. And you said Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
Walmart is the biggest retailer, but they are one of many at the top of the corporate pyramid, if you will, that have started to do away with college degree requirements. For example, Apple, Microsoft, IBM, and Google have eliminated degree requirements for many of their high-end jobs even. I mean, if you want to go be a CEO, it might be pretty hard to get in without a degree nowadays, but companies are realizing, and I think it ties in what you just said, that skill sets are a lot more valuable than I can prove this guy or girl sat through a class for 4 years, and was able to study hard. And that used to be kind of the argument for colleges that I heard a lot was it's less about your degree and the skills you learned in college and more about proving that you have the ability to buckle down and do what's needed and focus and get the job done. It always felt really cheesy and kind of a lame to me, but companies at the top of the pyramid, these massive billion-dollar companies, are starting to do away with that requirement. And I think it focuses on, they want skills, not someone who can sit in a seat for hours on end.
Well, I believe that there's so much that's gotten perverse about that whole at least you could buckle down methodology, because the incentive for colleges now, and you can look at this on their web pages and all this stuff, is their graduation rate. So it's really been flipped on its head, where a lot of these institutions, especially the more prestigious ones, are ridiculously hard to get into, but nearly impossible to fail out of. And that is what has come, and you're really seeing that this now reflects in the marketplace, because you get people with higher end degrees, bachelor's degree, master's degree, or whatever, coming out of what was a very reputable university with no real discernible skills. And that's because the faculty and everything was incentivized to, you can't fail this person. And we see this over and over again, where whether it's just easy, irrelevant classes, which I'll admit I've taken in the past, whether that be in high school or some community college and different things, all the way to, it actually being part of your degree or your thesis or whatever you're trying to get through, just kind of gets pushed through rather than holding people accountable and actually having that fear of failing them and them not making it, because there's just too much money on the line, right? And who also wants to go to a college where 30% of the students fail out of it? They want to go to the school where 99% graduate. So that's just, I don't know, it just hit the point where, again, I don't feel like schools now really actually teach discernible skills. I don't think that they're actually going for that. I think it's the incentives are for other things.
I agree, and I have an interesting perspective on this. So I went to college, but I hated every second of it. I was the most pessimistic jerk of a college student that you could have ever met. I never lived in a dorm. As much as I could, I tried to take on online classes when I had to go on campus. I just kind of dragged my feet. And this is not going to be a shock to anyone who listens to this, so I'll just go and spill the beans. I went to UNO, University of Nebraska at Omaha, and there was a lot I loved about it. There's a lot I hated about it, but one sentiment that I heard from anyone I interacted with was how much we hated being kind of a tool for the Nebraska education collegiate system in general. And what I mean by that is, in Omaha, we would see our tuitions raise. We would see college sports teams be dissolved, all for the sake of financing UNL, University of Nebraska, and Lincoln. And they have other sub offices like in Kearney and so on and so forth, but they all feed back to the University of Nebraska system as a whole. And we were paying fees to support like Memorial Stadium Husker renovations in Omaha that we got no benefit from. I'm not a Husker fan. I don't care about Lincoln personally. I have no investment in it, but I had to pay for it. And I heard this sentiment from other students I was with, and I was like, you're right. That makes a lot of sense. And it was kind of just a bitterness that was growing, is that it became about money. We always knew college was expensive. We all knew we were collecting debt if you had student loans. And I joined the military for two reasons. Not to be a hoorah, serve my country kind of guy. That's not my personality. I joined because I wanted the VA home loan and college tuition paid for. And I worked 8 years of my life to get that college tuition paid for. And I hated every second of it. And I resented the college for not making the experience I worked hard for valuable to me. Now, don't get me wrong. And I'm going to not end this episode with just being like, screw college, no one should go. There are pros to it. And I want to talk about the pros as well as the cons. But everything you're saying, Tanner, really hits home. Unfortunately, you didn't have to go spend $80,000 to learn that the hard way. You were able to kind of see the writing on the wall and say, But before we go down that road, I wanted to talk about something else that has been a big factor, I think, in that percentage of people, seeing the validity in going to college. Another factor is there has been a widespread kind of renaissance in alternative learning methods. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is boot camps, certifications, giant fan of certifications, LinkedIn Learning, the Udemy's, all of these things. You can go learn actual skill sets. Do this, then do this. And if you run into this, you can go here. Actually learning a skill set for, free to $50, $100 and actually come out with knowing more. And I think those have become a very, very prominent piece in our education system.
Yeah. Well, just to circle back a little bit, like you were saying about the Omaha system and Nebraska feeding, Omaha feeding Nebraska and what have you. It feels like so much of these university systems and collegiate systems are just inward focused. It's all about them, what they do, their status. And really, it's just become a whole thing about status. It's not about the learning. It's not about the capacity, like what you come out with, but other than what you can say about yourself because you went there. And if they were really caring about learning, they would broaden admissions. They would just scale. So many of these places, Nebraska included, has lots of funds to scale at a much higher level. Or if you look at the Ivy League schools with these huge dowries of billions of dollars that they could do, they could just expand, open up more opportunities for more people. But it's because it's so tied to status now that it has this, again, perverse incentive for the reasons why people want to go and why they want to bring in certain people. And it's not around learning. So I love that you're bringing up these alternative methods because, again, even if it was about the learning, they put their stuff online for free. MIT does this, Harvard does this. You can sit in all the classes, but for the longest time, the prestige was in the degree. But now we're seeing that people coming out with degrees don't know what the hell they're doing. And that's been the biggest thing. So even going back to the Walmart stuff, if you can't find a capable person to fill that job just because they have a degree, you need to supplement that with things like work experience, prior work experience, or the degree. And I see that a lot in my job where, they'll take somebody who doesn't have a degree but has been doing it for 4 years. And they probably have a better head start by doing that. Mm-hmm. And it used to be, again, like, how do you get your foot in the door? How do you get started? But with things like certifications, licensure, intern programs, all these different self projects, publishing, all these things that you can do, you can start proving your value right away to get access to these things. The other thing that we've been seeing, because the Walmart stuff talks about, because people value it less, that just means that there's going to be less and less people in the job market for it. And so your pool of candidates are going to be so much smaller if you start being stingent and require these things. So that's just another reason why it actually loses its value in the marketplace, but again, maybe holds higher status in social aspects or something like that.
Yeah. So there was 3 other kind of themes that I was trying to put together some notes about why I think the desire for college. And I want to clarify, you and we are talking about the American college system right now. Globally, I have no experience, knowledge, or understanding of how their colleges work. I have read articles about the United States falling behind in several places, specifically mathematics, and so this might be an American endemic thing. I can't speak for other colleges in other countries, but there's three other themes that I think might help explain this drop in desire for college. And the first one's lost opportunity cost. You graduate at the age of 18, give or take 17, 18 years old. You are then in college for 4 years. If you want an undergraduate degree, 2 years for an associate's, blah, 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 blah. And then if you're a super ambitious person and you want to go on for a graduate degree, that's 6 years of college, and a doctorate is 8, and all that. It stacks up so much. And what I mean by lost opportunity cost is, once to put it in a business sense, is 2 to 8 years of your most prime, physically, mentally, energetically, are lost out on the hope that this pays off in the future and you can make money. I had a wonderful conversation with a tech CEO years ago, and he told me something that really kind of always stuck with me. He said, when I'm looking at applications for people in a senior C-suite director level above position, he said, I will immediately put everyone with an MBA over here into this pile. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. You want a director and a senior vice president, and you want them to have an MBA, Master's in Business Administration. He's like, no, it's quite the opposite. He's like, I hate people with MBAs. He said, they are the worst. And he's like, I know I'm a hypocrite. I have an MBA. This guy had a doctorate in business administration. What a crazy degree. But he said, people who come out of college with an MBA are some of the dumbest people I've ever met. And this is not to insult anyone who's listening to this on an MBA. With an MBA, please don't take that. This is not my words. Relaying a story. He said, they came out 6 years behind everyone else. He said, do they know a lot about business trends and acronyms and KPIs and metrics and all that good stuff? He's like, yeah, you bet. He said, but there's not a single thing I've ever learned from an MBA recent graduate that you couldn't just Google. And I was like, oh man. Okay, so I'm going on tangents because I wanted to tell that story,
No,
because
I love
I've always
that
thought
story.
about that.
Yeah. But it's true. I was just going to say, it's true. Like, again, it doesn't teach you to really learn. It teaches you to memorize, and it teaches you to memorize a very specific thing to get through that course to get that degree. And that doesn't translate to real life. And
Bingo.
that's the biggest thing with all of this stuff. So again, it's why are you postponing living just to go to get this thing that effectively puts you behind in both time as well as finances? And I'm sure, and please in the comments, talk to us about where you feel like the value. But I find, you can even say, like, let's go with the example of, like, everyone puts like, well, we need doctors to go to college, right? And you're like, maybe, because how effective is a doctor who graduated 20 years ago in modern medicine if they weren't practicing over the last 20 years? What's really important is things like certifications, again, licensure, amount of hours worked in a certain professional environment. So that's why they have residencies and all the, all this kind of stuff to really prove. I would argue that so much of the college stuff really doesn't hold true, especially as we're going into the world of AI and all these other things, which are dramatically going to change how we operate. Almost all of the older applications and textbooks are not going to be relevant. And outside, even as an example, outside of it being a complete money scheme, textbooks get changed every year. So if I went to school 10 years ago and read that textbook, how current is that degree in reality? Again, what really matters, like you're saying with your example with the MBA, it's real world application of the skills. And I would argue that degree does not show that you can do any of that, nor provide you any value outside of learning through independence and hard work and grit in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Point two. Sorry.
No, but you hit on it. It was a great segue because the second point I had that kind of in my head helped explain that statistic was uh, college isn't for everyone. And it's not about learning. Learning is for everyone. Every person learns, and every person, in my opinion, should desire to learn more. I think it's a valuable thing. What I mean is from first grade all the way through whatever level of college, it is very cookie cutter, meaning you and I will be taught the exact same way. And I can guarantee if you and I sat in a class together, um, we would come out with different knowledge because human beings are different and complex. And we have this whole science in adult learning right now that says you can't just stick everyone in a classroom in a lecture for 3 hours and expect them to come out and have found value in it. I mean, some people work great in that kind of environment, and some people will never flourish.
Here's a thought for you. Do you believe that we today are being taught to actually learn? And how many people truly understand how to learn new things?
Being taught to learn. That is a really good question. I don't know if I'm mentally prepared to answer that, because that kind of, it's igniting a lot of thoughts in my head right now, Tanner.
Because I
Are we being
was
taught
thinking
to
about
learn?
this earlier, or I was thinking about it earlier, where we're so reliant on like finding answers from Google. We don't actually think about things ourselves, or we will only regurgitate what we've been told or what we read prior. We don't really critically take things in, let it ruminate, learn it, especially first principles on a lot of these things, and then come up with an actual outtake or result or end product of that.
Mm-hmm.
I worry today that we have really lost that ability in some sense.
Is a really interesting concept, and I'm gonna have to be that jerk and just not answer your question, because I really need to think about that.
Yeah.
I will answer you on the side, but you've kind of put me down a rabbit hole in my head right
Yeah.
now.
And it goes
That's
back
a
to the
great point.
question on once AI starts getting into things too, will you need to learn it? Because that's the concern. Because I would argue that it is such a fundamental first principle skills to really like truly learn and understand things, that if we're just taking the easier route through technology and all these other things, like how will things end up? Sorry to get a little philosophical or whatever.
No,
On that. That's cool.
I love it. That was a really good question. But it leads me into kind of the second half of kind of my prep for this episode, is that I wanted to not just be anti-college. I don't think that's fair. I think the college system in the United States is in desperate need of an overhaul, whatever that is. I am not the person to suggest that, but one of the big pros to the college environment that I do firmly believe, and I have my own personal experiences with, is college provides a very broad learning experience. And what I mean by that is, if you go to college for criminal justice, for business, for finance, for art, whatever it is, you are of course going to study that. But what else you have to learn or study or at least partake in is things that will benefit you through life, and that is outside of your personal skill sets in your career. What I'm talking about is things like critical thinking, research, public presence, how to speak in front of a crowd. These are all things that you pick up in college. They are not courses per se, but they are skills you have to develop in order to be effective in college. And those skills, I think, can be invaluable to a person's life and career outside of the, I'm learning how to be a well, okay, maybe doctor's bad example. Let's not use doctors anymore. Outside of I'm learning how to be a business person, or I'm learning how to be a digital artist. These soft skills that you develop through the course of college, I think, are invaluable. And it's not to say you can't get them somewhere else, but college forces you to learn those skills. And people with critical thinking skills and the ability to research and the ability to talk in front of a crowd, I believe, I have no evidence to back this up, they can make it further in life, at least in the career aspect.
Yeah, I would just argue that should be taught earlier, and that's my thought.
Yeah, fair enough.
And that's where we can talk about the failures of high school and what we had there, but it just comes down to, again, these systems have been kind of put into place to churn out a result, but not really truly educate a person.
Hmm.
And we think about in history where my grandfather only had a seventh grade education, but in many ways, I wonder how superior that seventh grade education is compared to a lot of schools today with high school graduates, and how much more real life application there is
Hmm.
to different things. And I know there's deficiencies, especially when it comes to things like mathematics and all that. But you're having schools today. I think it was Baltimore or someplace. I'd have to Google it, but didn't have, it was 99% or some obscene number of students who couldn't read at their grade level. There's just massive deficiencies. Let's actually Google that. Baltimore reading. Okay, here's the thing. This is 2022. 77% tested at Baltimore High School read at an elementary level, some at kindergarten level.
Wow. Yeah.
So
It's
if we
powerful.
if we talk about the importance of, just they spent more time there, but they're not, again, learning and getting that value from it. It's a hard thing. And again, I think everyone can agree that there needs to be an overhaul through it.
Hmm.
But I'm really loving the trend, at least especially with higher education, because costs just keep going up, that it's losing its prestige. Like, people just really don't care. And I think we're finally on the first part of the curve where businesses are realizing it's like, okay, this marker just doesn't really matter. And there can be better avenues to get better results. Because again, universities are hotbeds for like research and all this other stuff, and you can argue all these things, but then you can think like, is there a more effective way of using those funds and energy? So it's just, I don't like where it's gone, and I'm excited that
Fair.
it's all starting to kind of fall apart in some degree, because I think that there can be much more innovation coming, especially with the technologies that are in play, that will actually make a better impact for people.
I agree. I just, as we begin to kind of come to a close for this episode, I think this has been a really interesting one. Um, I want to make. I can't. I tried to Google it real quick. I'll find it later. I had a quote a long time ago that I think something along the lines of "Education is the cure for ignorance." That is one piece that I fully believe that, but that does not. I said education, not college. College is not the cure for ignorance. Education is the cure for ignorance, and education, like you were talking, as a whole structure from kindergarten on up, um, can help to serve that purpose. It doesn't have to cost you $100,000 to be able to look at things from a different perspective, or to understand how to critically think, or how to do proper research. And colleges are not going to disappear ever, I think. I mean, we have to talk about it. Lawyers, doctors, those are people we want to have in-depth, hardcore education. I'm sorry, you're stuck with it. But
Maybe the AI could replace them.
well, yeah, once we get there, but for the next 20 years or so until that happens. No. But I agree with what you're saying. Education as a whole needs to be looked at and reviewed, not just assuming throwing $100,000 and going to the occasional toga party is going to cure. That's not accurate.
Yeah, just to kind of wrap up, I guess my thoughts here is, you need to rely on yourself and your individual learning journey and take it upon yourself to really learn these things and really educate yourself. You need to start thinking for yourself and really analyzing things rather than, again, just regurgitating what you've been told. And I feel that most of these college systems have just gotten to the point where, again, it's just a status symbol telling you how to think. and you come out to it, because then you don't have to do that hard work yourself and really shape yourself. You can get your identity bundled up in this nice little package, so you can come out and this is who I am, rather than really doing the hard work and finding that out yourself. And it's just not worth the costs. It's not worth the time, like you said. And it's just, I can't imagine spending $100,000 now for 4 years at a state school, or $223,000 for a private school. And that you can't bankrupt out of those loans. You're with those loans forever. They'll dock your Social Security so you can get those loans paid. And it's just putting everybody at such a disadvantage to being told that they could be somebody that they ultimately might not want to be. And that's what I hope that, people might get from this conversation a little bit, is just to think harder around, like, what is the best path for them? Because again, it's not, you shouldn't be going to school. It isn't, it is by far, you need to always be learning. But I'm just arguing that the places that you would assume at first glance that it's going to teach you something probably aren't actually doing that, and you need to go just a little bit deeper.
Well said. Well,
right.
Thank you for your time, Tanner. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast or you found it a little bit controversial, let us know. Please, we always like if you share and subscribe to our content. We are like we said at the beginning of the podcast, we're getting some awesome traction, especially on YouTube. And we encourage you to check it out. Just that one like really goes a long way for us. Leave a comment. We'd love to answer people. I do my absolute best to respond to every single comment, preferably positive ones, but I try and respond to all of them because we want to interact with you guys. So let us know. All right.
Yep, absolutely. And we will see you all next week. Bye-bye.